Hey everybody, so in today's demonstration, I'm going to be cooking a keto bread with a twist, a little bit with a twist. I'm not going to follow the recipe exactly, and I'm going to also be explaining some of the science that goes behind it. So what I have here is I have 6 white eggs that I'm going to be using. I have 1 cup and a half of almond flour. I also have a quarter cup of melted butter that we're going to be adding to our recipe. I have some baking powder, and this is where all the magic happens, everybody. And then I also have some cream of tart, which is a staple to our recipe for our egg white foam. And then I'm going to use a little bit of vanilla. The recipe calls for liquid stevia. I'm not real crazy about liquid stevia because it has an aftertaste that I'm not crazy about. So I'm going to be using that. And then I'm also going to be using a little bit of powdered sugar just to add a little sweetness to it. Not a whole lot, but just a little bit. And so those are the ingredients for my recipe. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to be separating the egg whites with the from the egg yolks. Okay. Now I'm not really good at this at all. I wish I was a little bit better than what I am, but I'm going to make it work. Okay. And so I'm scooping out the egg yolk and putting it in the food processor there. And sometimes that egg yolk doesn't seem like it just want to separate like it needs to. But hey, we're going to make it work, okay? Another thing that I'm going to do is that this recipe calls for uh, 6 egg yolks and the egg whites from 6 eggs. But because I don't want a eggy taste to my bread, I probably will not use all of the egg yolks for this recipe for that reason. But I will use the majority. Now, the egg whites are very, very important because the egg whites are going to help keep the structure of our bread. What happens with the egg whites is that the egg whites contain protein that helps create a bond. And when we start whipping the egg whites to a foam, we're going to break those protein bonds, and then those protein bonds are going to come back together to help form our structure of the bread. So we got to have our egg whites for that reason. They're very, very important to this whole process, okay? So now that we have the egg yolks and the egg whites separated, I'm going to add, let's see, 1/4 teaspoon of our cream of tartar to our egg white. And the reason why I'm adding that is because the egg whites by themselves will foam up like we need them to, but without the tartar, they won't stabilize, which means that they won't hold very long. And so what we're going to do is we're going to add the cream of tart to it, and then we're going to start the foaming process with our egg white. Okay, so I finally got the egg whites to beat, and it took me a minute. And then one of the things I remembered is that it's better to use a metal bowl whenever you're trying to beat your egg whites, because when using a plastic bowl, remember that plastic has some fat in it. Those fat bonds kind of keep the protein bonds from whipping into action like we would want. And so I finally got it to the consistency that I needed for this recipe. And so I think we're good on that. So next, I'm going to add butter to our egg yolks now, and we're going to mix that in because we're mixing all of our wet ingredients in. So I'm going to add the butter into our food processor, and we're going to give it a quick spin. And because I said I was going to add a little bit of vanilla to this recipe, I'm going to add maybe about a teaspoon of vanilla to this recipe. Not very much, but this is my own, doing here. So I'm going to add that, and we're done with our vanilla. And so I'm going to mix that in. Okay. And then before I add the almond flour, I'm going to add our baking powder. This is where all the magic is. This recipe calls for 3 teaspoons of baking powder. And so I'm going to add that in. Now, I love baking powder, especially since I found out what it does. The baking powder contains acids and bases to cause a chemical leavening process when we bake the food. And when we get this from the grocery store, more likely it's going to be more double acting, which means that we're going to have a chemical reaction whenever we add it to a wet ingredient, and then we'll have another chemical reaction when it actually bakes. So this is going to give our bread its rise. And without this, our bread would be dense. There will be no leavening or anything in the baking. So that's the reason why adding this baking powder is going to be very key to the recipe. So the recipe calls for 3 teaspoons. Awesome. Now, one of the things I want you to notice, and I'm going to show everybody, is that you get more like a tough consistency when you initially mix this. This is going to change whenever you add the foam to this. So now we're going to add a portion of our foam so that we could add the texture that we want before we put it in the baking pan to do what it needs to do. See that foam? So notice that I did not try to overmix the recipe because we want those protein bonds from the egg white foam to stay in place. So this is the type of consistency I ended up with for the baking. And so now we're going to put it in our pan and we're going to bake it on 375 for right at about 30 minutes and hope that it comes out awesome. Okay? I think I got it well mixed in, and we're going to put it in the oven for 30 minutes and take it out and let's see how. All right, everybody, so it is time to look at our keto bread. It's been 30 minutes. Let's see how it turned out. All right, this is what we came out with. Let me see if I can create a better view there. It looks like I can. But as you can see, the keto bread did rise, and we did have the chemical reaction that we wanted. And looks like it turned out great. So the one thing I did forget was to add the powdered sugar. So, oh well, it's going to taste great regardless. So I'm looking forward to it. And I could tell that it's completely done. So I'm going to let this cool, and I'm going to have a bite. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you.